For 20 years, the biggest companies on earth tried to build the tablet. They spent billions. They launched dozens of devices. Every single one failed. Too heavy, too hot, running software nobody wanted, at prices nobody could pay. Then one launch turned the entire category from joke to the fastest selling consumer device in history. This is not a story about the iPad. It is about everything that had to break first. Every early tablet faced the same wall, the physics of heat, power, and input. Engineers tried to squeeze full computers into slabs barely thicker than a magazine, but the numbers did not lie. The typical x86 processor idled above 5 watts, enough to warm your hand through the case. Without aggressive cooling, these chips threatened to overheat in minutes. Even the best lithium-ion batteries of the early 2000s topped out at around 130 watt-hours per kilogram. Packing enough cells for just 3 hours of real-world use meant adding nearly 1/3 of a kilogram in weight. Every extra hour of battery life came at the cost of a heavier, bulkier device. Input was no less constrained. Resistive touchscreens, the industry standard before 2010, offered about 200 dots per inch of digitizer resolution. That is fine for tapping icons, but it left handwriting jagged and imprecise. The screens themselves needed thick glass and layered films to register pressure, adding more weight and making displays dimmer and less responsive. Attempts to raise digitizer accuracy above 200 dots per inch pushed costs up and battery life down. These raw numbers dictated everything: how hot a tablet felt in your lap, how long it could last unplugged, how thick it had to be just to avoid melting itself. The result was a cycle of trade-offs. Make it thinner, and it ran hotter. Make it lighter, and the battery died sooner. Push for better input, and the device grew more expensive and less portable. No amount of clever engineering could escape the limits set by watts, grams, and pixels. Early tablets like the HP TC1100 and Toshiba Portage 3500 were heavy, thick, and awkward to hold, over 1 kilogram in weight and more than 20 millimeters deep. Using one for even a few minutes left hands and wrists sore, especially when balancing the device in one hand and writing with the other. Human factors research from the early 2000s reported hand fatigue after just 15 minutes of note-taking, as the combination of mass and stylus pressure wore users down. The bulk was not just a design flaw, it was the price of running Windows XP on x86 processors, which demanded metal heat spreaders and large batteries. A typical lithium-ion battery, sized for only 3 hours of mixed use, added nearly 300 grams. The 9 or 10-inch TFT screens, layered with resistive digitizers, made the devices both thick and fragile, further increasing weight and cost. Manufacturing costs reflected these choices. By the mid-2000s, building a full-featured slate meant a bill of materials over $800. The CPU alone could cost $90, the LCD $70, and the battery $40, with a magnesium frame and active digitizer pushing the price even higher. Efforts to cut costs, using plastic or shrinking the battery, only made the devices less usable. The trade-off was clear. Lighter meant shorter battery life, and sturdier meant a painful price tag. For most people, the discomfort and sticker shock outweighed any promise of portability, leaving early tablets to gather dust, waiting for a more human-centered approach. Before the iPad, tablets were a series of bold launches and quiet failures. In 1989, the GRAD-Pad 1900 appeared with a magnesium case and a price just under $2,000. It ran a pared-down MS-DOS, offered a stylus but lacked real handwriting recognition, and sold only a few thousand units. The high cost and limited software sealed its fate. 4 years later, Apple's Newton message pad promised to read handwriting for $999. Instead, it misread basic words and drained batteries quickly. The infamous Newton can't read home moment became late-night comedy. Despite updates, Newton never topped 200,000 sales and disappeared after 5 years. Palm's Pilot 1000, released in 1996, found success with its graffiti alphabet and instant on-speed at $299. Millions sold, but its tiny monochrome screen and limited features kept it from being a true tablet. In 2001, Microsoft's tablet PC arrived. Devices like the Toshiba Portage 1000 and the HP Compaq TC1100 ran Windows XP Tablet PC Edition, weighed over 4 pounds, and cost more than $2,500. Heavy, expensive, and reliant on a stylus, they struggled with short battery life and a desktop interface unsuited to touch. By the late 2000s, slates like the HP Slate 500 and the Asus ePad Transformer offered resistive touchscreens and phone-sized apps stretched awkwardly. High prices, input frustrations, and thin app catalogs kept tablets from catching on, no matter the brand. For anyone hoping to build a business or even just get work done, early tablets didn't just come up short on hardware, they arrived with almost nothing to run. Developers looked at the landscape and saw chaos. There was no single place to find or sell apps. Instead, software was scattered across manufacturer websites, third-party forums, and CD-ROMs tucked into device boxes. Each installer came with its own quirks, version mismatches, and security warnings. Updates were manual, downloads were risky, and support was a roll of the dice. By 2009, the entire Windows tablet PC ecosystem offered fewer than 500 apps designed for touch or pen. Most were basic note-takers, PDF readers, or clunky drawing tools. The big names, Microsoft Office and Adobe Photoshop, were never truly rebuilt for finger or stylus. Instead, they were awkwardly ported, with tiny buttons and menus that demanded a mouse and keyboard. Developers had little incentive to invest months rewriting software for a market that barely existed. Without a dedicated app store or a clear way to reach buyers, even the most creative teams hesitated. The risk was high, the audience was small, and the payoff was uncertain. As a result, the shelves stayed empty. Tablets promised a new way to work and create, but the absence of a thriving app ecosystem left them stranded, powerful in theory, but hollow in practice. For users and developers alike, the missing middle was impossible to ignore. 5 breakthroughs unlocked tablets, one after another. In early 2006, Jeff Hand's multi-touch demo stunned a packed TED audience. Fingers glided, pinched, and swiped, making styluses look obsolete in a single afternoon. The idea of direct, fluid interaction was suddenly real. In 2007, the iPhone arrived. It didn't just sell millions, it set a new standard for how screens should feel: responsive, intuitive, and fast. Usability studies showed people completed tasks a third faster and made half as many mistakes compared to old stylus devices. The App Store followed in 2008, giving developers a single, trusted marketplace. Within 6 months, 10,000 developers were building apps, filling the shelves with software tailored for touch. Hardware finally caught up in 2010 with ARM's Cortex-A8 chip, twice the performance per watt of Intel's Atom, running at 1 GHz while sipping half a watt. Tablets could be thin, cool, and last all day. Then price fell. In April 2010, Apple launched the iPad at $499, half the cost of earlier failures. Each breakthrough smashed a barrier: input, software, power, and price. Until at last the cage around tablets fell away. Magazine editors saw their entire workflow flipped overnight. Instead of waiting weeks for a print issue, teams began building interactive layouts that could update daily, complete with videos, animations, and clickable covers. By the end of 2011, digital magazine sales in the US had climbed 22%, with over 1,200 magazine apps in the App Store and millions of issues downloaded. For the first time, a glossy spread could come alive right under a reader's fingertips. In classrooms, teachers traded stacks of textbooks for a single glass slab. Across the US, nearly half of public school districts launched iPad pilots within 2 years. Students pinched, swiped, and tapped through lessons, while teachers used instant feedback apps to track progress in real time. Surveys from 2011 show 68% of educators rated the iPad as very useful, twice the rate for laptops. The old computer lab with its rows of desktops suddenly looked obsolete. Retail stores moved fast too. Managers swapped clunky cash registers for sleek iPad-based point-of-sale systems. By late 2011, 250,000 iPads were handling checkouts in North American shops. Lines moved faster, receipts went digital, and average basket sizes grew by 7%. For many small businesses, the iPad was not just a gadget, it was a lifeline. Artists and designers dove into a new world of creative apps. Procreate and Sketchbook racked up millions of downloads. For the first time, a portable device could handle sketching, painting, and editing without compromise. The iPad's high-resolution display and touch-first tools gave creatives a digital studio they could carry anywhere. In just 2 years, these four worlds, publishing, education, retail, and the arts, were not just testing tablets. They were rebuilding themselves around them. The iPad was not another failed experiment. It was a new foundation. Today, the line between tablet, phone, and laptop blurs more each year. As foldables and wearables push boundaries, one lesson endures. Timing and design, not just technology, decide what replaces what. If you're ready for the next leap, subscribe and stay curious.